Terrifying people with stories has been a pastime since cavemen drew on the cave walls. These scary stories are centered around supernatural beings or anything related to our fear of death. It didn't take long after the cinema came to be in the late 19th century for filmmakers to film the horror genre.
Hi, I'm Andrew Slaney. I'm a student at Full Sail University, and today we're going to take a trip together. A trip through the history of horror.
In the 1890s, some of the first moving pictures, such as simple scenes of everyday life, caused feelings of horror in audiences. There was something supernatural the way people appeared on film. In 1896, a man named George Méliès created the first horror film, The House of the Devil. It showed cauldrons, skeletons, ghosts, bats, and even the devil. Between the 1900s and 1920s, supernatural-themed films came to the world, such as Frankenstein and Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde.
Horror genre was even more reborn once the 1930s hit. The technology for sound and filmmaking helped bring the terror. Sound effects added to the fear, with creaking doors and the sound of thunder. Filmmaking went from symbolism to realism, and the silent cinema turned into monsters that howled and growled.
Within the 20s and 30s, this time was considered the golden age of horror. Instead of dancing skeletons, flying bats, and actors vanishing in a puff of smoke, filmmakers had to up their game in terror. The 30s brought us great classics such as Dracula, Freaks, and Mad Love. Films with supernatural, violent, or fantasy elements became a target to censors. The only thing they really had left to work with was mad scientists. The 40s to the 50s brought us Dr. Cyclops, the Ape, and even brought back the classic Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde.
Going into the 50s and 60s was known as the gimmicky years. 3D, electric buzzers in theater seats, even paid actors and actresses in the theater to scream and faint just to add to the fear to the audience.
After World War II and the Cold War, people feared the nukes. Filmmakers took advantage of this fear. This brought us The Blob, Them, and even Godzilla. Within the 60s, horror movies reflected change, uncertainty, and a generation gap. The relax of censorship allowed filmmakers to debunk old taboos and find new ways for sex and violence. Alfred Hitchcock made his way into the horror genre. He brought us two big classics such as Psycho and The Birds. The 70s and 80s brought us occult-style films. It mostly came to houses and kids being possessed by the devil. The occult-style horror brought us The Exorcist and The Omen. Supernatural-style horror is now back. Literature became the main source material. Because of this, Stephen King brought us Carrie and The Shining.
There's one type of horror films that symbolizes the 80s, the slasher films. An inventive killer going after teens and just killing them in different ways.
Kicking off the slashers was the Texas Chainsaw Massacre in '74. Over the next decade, the output became plentiful. Halloween, Friday the 13th, and Nightmare on Elm Street was the most successful and brought their own long-running franchises.
Suffering from slasher films and their sequels, the horror genre lost steam coming into the 90s.
The arrival of computer-generated special effects brought us CGI monster titles that did very little, like Anaconda and Deep Rising. The rally of torture porn and religious horror coming into the wake of the 2000s with the Conjuring and Saw series and no sign of letting up.
The future of horror can bring us anything that'll chill us to the bone, whether it's good remakes of Candyman or Halloween Kills. Until next time, stay scary.